Welcome to Ask the FM Doctor, an interactive web series brought to you by the Simplard Foundation and IFMA to help you navigate the complex and ever-changing world of facility management. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a newcomer to the field, you'll find valuable insights and tips to deliver a better experience for your stakeholders while saving money. Join us on the third Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. time to learn from our FM docs while connecting with other facility managers from around the world. Register today at simplerfoundation.org/FM-doctor so you don't miss an upcoming session.
So let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. The main thing that we're really interested in, what we're going to talk about today here is some current workforce trends and projections. And I'll spend most of the time today going through human dimensions and what that means for facility professionals. And we'll have some recommendations to close it out, right? What's interesting as we dive into this here is that I find for most facility professionals, and you in fact all have dealt with this for, is how hard is it nowadays to find people on our jobs? Whether it's if we're hiring contractors, whether we work in facilities or trying to find new technicians to come into our workforces, we know that finding people is really, really difficult, right? And so part of that, what the need here is to help us look at as to what's going on, as to what's driving these different challenges and issues within our organizations. So that's what we're going to focus on here, right? So a couple of questions for y'all, and then feel free to unmute yourself or jump into the chat box here, but a couple of questions to kind of set the stage. Since the year 2000, has the U.S. population gotten older or younger? And again, this is just focused on the United States, but globally, we see similar trends. What do we all think here? The answer, of course, is older, yes, by about 3.5 years. Yes, thank you, David. Older by about 3.5 years. Is this trend accelerating or decelerating? And the answer, of course, is that it is accelerating. In fact, 2021 was the most rapid increase across that 21-year range. The reason why this is so relevant to us today as we think about this is that with an older population, especially in facilities management, as people get older and they eventually retire, what that means here is that there's going to be a need to bring in new talent inside of our facilities profession. Certainly IFMA, the IFMA Foundation, other professional groups have made strides, significant strides to address these issues, but this is a really major thing here, right? And this chart here, this is kind of the data charts, but what this chart really shows here, it emphasizes why this is such a big deal. So what this chart shows is the current demographics. Again, this is just US focused, but if you look at the trends broadly, globally, you'll see similar sorts of things here, right? So what this shows here on the left-hand side are males, and on the right-hand side are females here. And as you look at the overall age groups between younger folks down here on the bottom to older folks here on top, is that there are shifts in demographics that are happening. So when you think about this orange category here, these are what we call senior leaders. And these are people that are leaving the workforce or very close to leaving the workforce. The reason why this is relevant to us is because as we think about these people, as they leave us, as they leave the workforce, is that they bring with them a tremendous amount of insights and expertise. And when they leave, they take that knowledge with them, that institutional knowledge. And so from a management, maintaining our facilities, that becomes a very difficult thing here. The next group of people that comes in after them are these next generation leaders. They're filling the gap of these people that are leaving here. But if you look at the number of people, in other words, these white boxes, this is from 2010, green is 2019, is that you see there's far fewer of them, relatively speaking, to the baby boomers or senior leaders that are now leaving, right? So as you have new people that are coming in to take over these leadership positions, and as you look to the future here, especially with the younger folks down here, these are future reinforcements. There's just frankly fewer people available to provide the resources that historically that people have come in and provided to us, right? So how in this world does this tie to human dimensions? And the bigger things that we're really concerned here is that this is the situation we're faced with here today. And this is why it's so important to understand the change in demographics here. And the reality of this, and this might be a bit of a dark turn here, but the reality is that for those of us that struggle with workforce, for those of you that struggle with finding people, is that as of today, this is the best it will ever be, and probably for the remainder of our careers. And the reason being is that these population demographics, it takes years for themselves to correct it, right? If you look to the future reinforcements, the younger people that are coming up, there's fewer of them. We know the birth rates here have dropped significantly in the last 50 years. So as we deal with this here, is that, in my opinion, out of all the different things that we're looking at in the workforce, broadly in facility management, workforce is the number one thing that we're going to have to deal with, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. So as a result of that, and the reason why we get to our main point for today's discussion here is that there is a limited pool of FM experts, right? And what these FM experts look like is they're high performing, they're extremely skilled, and have the capability to get the jobs done that actually need to get done, right? We know there's a limited number of these people. There's also this pool, in other words, the people available to provide this expertise varies in time based on when the project is or when the renovations need to get done, the location of that facility, and also the type of buildings or the sector in which that facility serves, right? So this will certainly have an impact on different types of projects and different types of people that are available to work in facilities to enhance that workplace experience for the folks that come in here, right? The last thing I'll submit to you all is that I think that many times as organizations, we underestimate the cost of working with average or low performing suppliers, folks, or whoever, right? So if that's true, then, and if you think about that, who's ever had a really negative experience? Right? You hire somebody, whether it's a contractor, supplier, or just an individual, that negative experience of hiring somebody that doesn't know what they're doing is extremely costly, both in terms of real dollars, but also consider the stress aspect of it, of having to have rework, having to redo things because somebody doesn't know or doesn't have the capability to actually get things done here. So our proposal here to begin rectifying these issues is to think about human dimensions, or in other words, personality profiles of the actual people involved on our day-to-day work. How do we find people who make a good fit? It's tied to the personalities, right? Again, this is a quote by somebody that just made that up, obviously not a real person here, but what I'm trying to get at here is that, have you ever had any experience with a group of people that just click? Things just work well. You have a project, the team gets together, and it's a very efficient, cohesive team to get something done, right? We've all had those experiences. So that experience of having a team that just works well together is really what's driving the research here. Meaning that if we know that in some situations it goes well in terms of a group of people doing something, and in other situations it doesn't go well, the fundamental question is, what makes it work? And the answer we propose here, and as we have a lot of research to back this up here, is focus on the personality profiles, the actual people involved on doing the work, right? On the previous slide here, we talked about that there's a limited pool of people available. And because of that, we have to think about how to actually get done. So to set some context here today, we have collected north of 10,000 profiles, human dimension profiles, at different types of people. We've had about 35 master's students, 7 PhD dissertations centered on this topic specifically about what can we look at in terms of identifying what these high performers look like inside of construction or facilities or procurement, or what other job function might be available, right? There's really 4 major tools that we looked at. We wanted to look at something that's related to personality and aptitudes, which is called Hexaco. We also looked at emotional intelligence. The third one is some sort of behavioral diagnostic tool, which is DISC. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the last one you might be more familiar with is what's called Myers-Briggs. What we've found, though, is that Myers-Briggs doesn't really have the predictive power in some of the other tools available. So we don't collect data on that anymore because we just found that's very inconsistent. It doesn't help us actually predict what when somebody's going to fit really well into a position. So we're going to go through this briefly here. I wanted to talk about the 3 major personality tools available to us. And then I'll talk about some of the actual results we've seen in using these tools here. So the first one is the Hexaco personality inventory. What this does here, it takes the 5 major personality aptitudes, so emotionality, extroversion, openness to experience, being aware of what's going on, and agreeableness, and it adds in a 6th, which is the honesty, humility factor. And what it does is ask the respondents a series of questions to go through these different criteria. And the goal of this is to help understand how people respond basically in different situations from a personality standpoint, right? The second one here, and maybe some of you heard about this one, is emotional intelligence. And what this is divided into basically 4 different categories of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and also relationship management. So when you combine these scores together, you come up with what's called the overall emotional intelligence score. And what this is here is the ability for us to stay aware of our own emotions, but also the ability to look at other people and understand what their feelings and what their thoughts are on a given situation. That skill set of being able to understand ourselves from an emotional standpoint, but also be able to read the room, as it were, to understand what different concerns people have, is really difficult. And not everybody has the same levels of their ability to actually read a situation and to know how to respond to that. The EI score provides a good baseline as to our skills and be able to actually do that. And then finally, the third one here is looking at behavior through what's called DISC. And what this does here, it looks at different types of behavior personalities or traits to look at, where do you generally fall, right? So this quadrant, you see basically a quadrant graph here. On the top left-hand side, this is dominant. And what this means here, that somebody is very dominant, is they look at a situation, and people in this category can be described as demanding or forceful. But the main question they ask here is what's actually going on. The next one is inspiring. People who tend to fall in the inspiring behavioral side of things tend to look at how can we discuss with others. They tend to be a little bit more emotional, but they ask them the main question that somebody on the inspiring side of the scale would be considered asking questions like who's actually involved, and what do they look like. The next one here is supportive, and people that fall in this category tend to want a steady pace or a security of not having that sudden change in a given situation, right? They tend to ask the question of how is this happening? What's kind of driving this? And finally, cautious is these people tend to want to adhere to rules, follow regulations, have a structure, and really understanding the why of why things happen. What's driving this situation, right? So what we've done here is we've taken these different personality profiles. Like I mentioned, we've collected about 10,000 folks that participated in this, and we've developed individualized reports for the respondents. We've taken these data and provided a different profiles and assessments of how people fall, and then we're creating benchmarks of how other types of people fall within different job functions. And I want to talk about the results here in a minute. So what you can do with this data here is a couple different things, right? It's really costly to hire somebody, whether it's a person or a company or whoever, only to realize 3, 6, 9 months down the road here that it's not a good fit, right? So that's one of the major reasons why we're interested in this, that if we can find better people that are a better fit for our organization or the job, that's hugely beneficial and that saves a lot of money, right? Is to also identify existing talent within our organizations, people that work well, people that are inside of our companies, and we need to know who these people are so that we can hopefully retain them, which is tied to this third bullet point, right? So that's how we're kind of looking to use the tools here from an organizational standpoint going forward, right? There's different ways to look at this. One of the things that we started doing here is let me kind of back up a little bit. We collected this data, we started developing profiles by different job functions. So for example, project managers, virtual design and construction like BIM people. We looked at procurement people, we looked at facility managers, we looked at site superintendents. And what we're finding here is that based on the job function that people have here, is that the people tend to gravitate to those jobs based on their personality profiles. So if you think about that and kind of walk through the next step here, is that there's a lot of very positive implications because of that, right? If you can take a personality assessment and you compare it to different types of job functions, as an individual, this can be extremely helpful to know, well, I may not be too happy as like in a site superintendent role, but as a project manager, my personality is much more suited to be in that position, right? So that's how these tools are available or helpful to us here. The second thing we've also done here is we looked at, well, what if we were to take an individual job function and look at differences within that one function, right? In other words, if we're to identify the top performing project managers compared to everybody else here, what does that look like? So what we did here is we collected data. Again, this example here is just project management. Is we looked at all the project managers we had data for. We did some additional analysis. We did surveys and interviews actually of their supervisors to ask the supervisors' ratings to help us identify who these top performers are. So when I say top performer, what that means in the context of construction is we actually collected data on minimal change orders on their projects, minimal schedule delays, and also their supervisor's evaluation of that particular person as to whether or not they're a high performer. What we found here is that out of the entire data set we're looking at, 6% of the folks are what we consider rock stars. They're like the best of the best of the best. The other 50% are your typical average project managers, and the other 40% below average, right? And again, these are just relative to the average here. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're not they're delinquent doing their jobs here, but it's just below that average, right? So what does this actually mean here, right? When you think about what makes a project manager or a facility manager good, that can mean a lot of different things here. And like I said, when we define good, what that means is project performance data, right? Okay, so what did we actually find with this? Again, this is just focused in construction. It's not FM here, but I think that a lot of these trends here, and when we're talking about this new research project we're doing, is applicable to other fields as well. For construction project managers, here's what we found of the highest performance, the cream of the crop. The number one thing we found here is that on average, the best PMs have a much higher level of patience compared to everybody else. In fact, on average, and again, these are statistically significant, 17% higher patience rating on this personality profiles compared to everybody else, right? And again, this makes sense, right? If you're a project manager and you have to deal with a lot of personalities and different people on the jobs here, it would make sense logically that you want a patient person to excel in that position. If you have, let's say, a very patient foreman, right, that may not be a good experience, right? You want your foreman to be aggressive to actually get things done. And of course, the data also relates to that. Number two here is forgiveness. They have a very high trust, even after people make mistakes. That's a part of life, and their understanding of that situation. And number three here, we found that to be much higher compared to everybody else from a construction project manager, is to be agreeableness. Or in other words, the way we think that means here is collaborative in nature, that we have to work together to get things done here, right? If out of curiosity here, folks, think about this here. If you were to look at the number 4 trait out of all these data here, what do you think would be the number 4 trait that were the best of the best tend to rank higher? Any ideas? Number 4? The answer being here is they tend to be less creative. Now, this one's interesting here, right? And the reason why I say it's interesting is because we've seen this not just in construction project managers. We've seen this in other job functions as well, that typically the top performers, the best of the best, tend to be a lot less creative, which kind of goes against what we've typically heard, right? It seems a little bit counterintuitive. Well, I think the reason why we tend to see that the top performers have a less level of creativity is that many times when we think about creativity, that means a very complex, right? Creative people tend to see beauty in complexity, whereas top performers tend to see beauty in simple answers, in simplicity. And so I think that's what's going on here, that if we're really good at our job here, we're able to take a very difficult situation and boil it down to a very simple perspective here. Now, again, this varies by job function, right? We've seen it be pretty consistent here, but in some jobs like architecture, for example, you want your best architects to be very creative. That's an inherent part of what they do. But again, it can certainly vary by job function, right? We also looked at difference between field leaders, so foremen and superintendents compared to project managers. Again, we saw very consistent trends about what this is here. So the reason why this makes this so exciting here is that this data here is predictable. Is that when you look at the data sets and you collect all this information, we now are starting to have predictive power to look at, well, based on everything you're seeing here, this type of job, will work well for you or it won't work well for you, right? The other thing we also did here is to look at different types of people in the organization to know based on what their level of experience is. And we're also starting to see that the experience levels also is influenced by or is affected by somehow the personality data, right? So we collected data about entry-level project managers, people that have a couple of people working for them, more senior people that is a level 3, and finally level 4 is somebody who oversees multiple project managers. So we look at skill levels and capabilities. We also looked at leadership positions, and guess what? It's also predictable. So you can take all of this information here as one example, is to look at different type of people and pair them to what the high performer looks like for that given job function. So this is a high performing project manager, and this is the benchmark data. And if you're looking to hire Susan, Larry, or Bob to work in this position, you can look at their profiles, compare them to the benchmark, and see who would be the best fit for this particular position, right? So what we've seen here, and again, we have white papers, we have a lot of data. If you are actually interested in learning more about these personality profiles and the research we've done in this area, drop me an email, and we'd be very happy to discuss that with you and provide some of those details as to what that looks like. Now, I mentioned here, how in the world is this related to facility management? Well, what we're doing right now is that we are actively collecting we're basically trying to build out personality profiles for facility managers. So all the data I've shown you here, we have very limited data about FM specifically. IFMA is sponsoring a research project to help us look into succession planning and facility profiles of different people within that space here. The one thing I've dropped into the chat box here, that if you would like a free personality profile, nobody's going to see that, it's going to be totally confidential, is that if you go to that link or snap a picture of this QR code here and volunteer for the study, you can also join in on this. Last check, yesterday morning, we had about 2,000 people registered to volunteer for the study. We're trying to get that up a little bit higher here. But if you want to participate in this and get your free personality profile, definitely click on the link, scan the QR code, and volunteer for them. In about 3 to 4 weeks, you'll get an email with the full personality profile that have all the questions. It takes about 20 minutes to complete here, but this is a fantastic opportunity that if you want to get involved with this, IFMA is sponsoring this project, and it's going to be pretty incredible. So be sure to take a look at that. Tell your friends about it. Send the link to all your colleagues and anybody else that you want to send that to, because this is the chance. This is again, a fantastic opportunity.
Thank you for joining us for today's session of Ask the FM Doctor. Be sure to mark your calendars now and join our next webinar at 12 p.m. Central Time on the third Tuesday of the month. We look forward to seeing you again.